Oh, hello. You found Waypoints, where the Waypoint staff and friends take a break to nerd out and deep dive on the culture, art, and entertainment that's been inspiring and provoking us lately. Gathered around the table this week, we've got Austin Walker.
Hey.
And Cado.
Hi.
And today we're going to be discussing, in the first segment, the musical Hamilton, which I finally saw due to a Christmas gift from my parents over the holidays. And then in the second segment, we're going to be discussing Knives Out, but I'm going to warn you up front here that the nature of Knives Out is such that you can't really say a lot of interesting things until you begin getting into plot details and spoilers. This is a movie where a lot of the pleasure is seeing how it is going to come together and experiencing some of the twists from a naive perspective. So if this is an experience you're looking forward to having, I strongly recommend maybe you put a pin in this podcast and come back to it after you've seen the movie, because that second segment is going to spoil the entire film. But first, so over the winter break, I finally saw Hamilton. I was visiting family in Chicago, and they bought us tickets to go check out the Chicago production before it closed. And I was surprised by my reaction because I fully expected to be much more negative on the play. And I think part of that is, and this is kind of what I wanted to put to y'all, the thing I've been trying to figure out is Hamilton itself kind of an insidious or toxic work? Or is it mostly the phenomenon that is Hamilton and the fan base it attracted and the discourse around it that kind of poisoned the well? Like, is Hamilton just one of those unfortunate works that becomes way more popular and bears way more cultural significance than the work itself can sustain?
I think it's a good question. I want to say up top, I've listened to the Hamilton soundtrack 0.8 times.
0.8?
I could not get through
Couldn't
it,
even
dude.
get all the way through?
No, I couldn't.
Damn.
I couldn't. My relationship with the show is pretty distant. Outside of distant and made more distant because of the kind of cultural response to it that you're gesturing to here, Rob. Right? Like, I don't know about y'all, but it was unbearable. I went very quickly from trying to get tickets to see it to never wanting to see it on my feed. If I was a better person, I would have muted it and saved myself a lot of grief. But instead, I just kind of like, okay, white people, y'all are really into this, huh? Which is reductive, obviously. It's a show led by a man of color and starring lots of people of color, and a show that
Completely, except for one
character who's King George, right? White dude. And obviously is a show that's been supported by many black and brown folks, and enjoyed by many black and brown folks. But the response to it always felt like it carried a degree of hand washing of the people liking it, if that makes sense. Like, it was your gateway away from I listen to everything except for rap and country to a world in which you could say I like conscious hip hop. Of course, rap can be art. Like, and when I say those things, like I truly mean that was the way I was seeing it deployed by kind of a cultural coastal elite type, media elite folks who were above 45. Lots of people in our age group, lots of white folks in our age group came up on hip hop, and in fact, I think most of the cynicism I've seen about that show come from people in our age group across racial lines who find it suspect as a cultural product. I think it's what you said. Find its success suspect because it seems as if its success is tied to the project of like a certain class of folks deciding to pull wool over their own eyes about American history, deciding to distance themselves, very publicly distance themselves from a sort of racialized distaste for hip hop, stuff like that, right?
So my arc with this was I listened to the cast album a few times and I liked it, but I think the thing that surprised me when I listened to the cast album is how much I liked the non-hip-hop tracks more than the stuff that was being celebrated as the brand of Hamilton, right? To me, it was the weakest parts of that show were frequently the bits where there was rapping. When it went in a traditional Broadway show tunes direction, it was like, okay, this is decent Broadway music.
Right, well, like that's the thing is you get to compare it to Broadway music at that point and not to hip-hop, which is... And listen, I'm not saying... I am saying that Lin-Manuel Miranda is not like a top tier rapper, like
No.
No.
at all, or a writer of rap songs. I am saying that, and so like when I make that comparison, it is not a generous comparison for him to bring on. But that's not the audience that he was like. It's a Broadway show. You know what I mean? Like I get it.
Right. So there's a little bit of pretense with Hamilton. And I think the other part of this for me is that if you look at Hamilton as an artifact of 2015 when it was released, and it becomes this phenomenon through 2015 and 2016, and then it becomes a little bit of like a resistance cult object in the wake of the 2016 election, I think the other thing that really works against this play is that it purports to be about... I was having this conversation with Troy Goodfellow the other day. He's my co-host on Three Moves Ahead. He's a big musical theater nerd. But he made a good point that Hamilton is a musical that pretends it is about ideas, and it is not. Like, ultimately, it is a story of kind of an ambitious asshole and the effect he has on the people around him. But he's meant to be valorized or rendered into a hero because supposedly he's on the cutting edge of this movement for freedom, right? He is a man of high ideals and conviction. And even listening to the Cast album, it doesn't really hang together. Like, the glimpses we get of him being a leader, of like the things that, you know, the things he's juxtaposed against early in the play is the very pragmatic Aaron Burr, whose tragic flaw is that he's constantly waiting for the right moment to make his move and advance socially. And he's waiting and waiting, and history passes him by. But Hamilton, his point is that Burr is paralyzed by indecision and lack of conviction. But I, Hamilton, am a man of conviction. I'm a man of strong beliefs. And our evidence for that is he thinks America should be independent. That's basically it. But like, he's like, man, America's an awesome idea. I'm going to rap about it. And everyone's like, God damn, this kid's amazing. Like, listen to him talk about how we should be an independent country. What an incredibly transgressive idea, supported by a lot of the elites of Northeastern society. And
a lot of the
play,
slave-owning elites, by the way, which, again, we don't really get into much in the soundtrack that I listened to 4 years ago. Like, again, I was one of the cards on the table here. I'm not saying that I'm up on...
2 references, I think, to slaves.
Thank you, Cado.
In one song. Yeah. I listen to this thing a lot.
Good.
Honestly.
And it's mostly used, it's deployed really opportunistically as a burn against Jefferson at one point, where it's like, we know who's really doing the planting down south, Jefferson.
Got him.
And it's like,
Get the fuck out of here with that shit. Come on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but
I mean, like, fuck Thomas Jefferson also, but
but I think the point here is that one of the things that I think Hamilton suffers from is as a cultural object, it was positioned as inspiring in part because it's casting it's casting the founding fathers and founding mothers as people of color. It's telling the story through rap, but also I think because of that it's sort of positioned as somehow the story of Hamilton himself, an immigrant, a striver who rose to the top of colonial society, should also be inspiring. And watching it from the vantage of today, but I think even listening to it back in like 2016 as this phenomenon took off, I still find myself waiting for the part where, like, when does this become particularly admirable? Right? Like, when do we see evidence that this guy actually has beliefs in ideas beyond himself, whose promulgation and pursuit of those beliefs doesn't advance his own interests. Because Hamilton is richly rewarded for every stance he takes, right? This is the other thing is, he is a man of strong conviction that America should be free. And he slots right under George Washington's, wing and rises to become the Secretary of the Treasury and the architect of the National Bank. This is someone who becomes enormously wealthy and powerful through his political activity. And so it's one of those, it's a tough sell for this guy to be read as some sort of idealistic hero. But I think in terms of the cultural phenomenon of Hamilton, that is how that play and that story was positioned, and it never sat well.
How do y'all feel this? Go ahead if you have something else.
I was just going to say that it felt like an attempted reclaiming at the building of this country, like the way that it was actually built off the back of immigrants and slaves, and like the people who built this were those people, but like this kind of like I don't want to. The word that came to mind was facile, but I don't know. Just like replace, like slotting in.
This is exactly what
brown and black bodies, but for the people who
were still founding fathers. It's right. Still, the specific thing I want to know is like, how do y'all feel and engage with the still fundamental beating heart of the kind of like great man of history,
right?
Like engine that still seems to be at the heart of this work? Or, I mean, I guess to counter that a little bit, I guess you could make the case that part of what the play does is offer focal point on interiority of the supposed great men, right, revealing them to be complicated and to have, love lives and to make mistakes and da-da-da-da-da. But a
large part of that second act is his fuck ups and
totally.
That whole
but I think that also happens with classic great men of history stories. Do you know what I mean? That like the great, oh wow, but also check out, look what he sacrificed, or look at the ways in which his personal life was troubled while he was pushing forward the capital P American progress.
Right.
And I think that stuff can grate with me, but I'm curious, as people, you listen to the show way more than me and you've seen it now, is that a fair complaint for me to make, or does that kind of drift away?
So this is one of those, this is where I was surprised by Hamilton. I think in terms of it being a play that tells that story, look, this is a character-driven play about the founding of the United States. Like, it's going to be a great man vision of history that's presented. But I think the thing that I found interesting here is that, and Cado, you were alluding to it, the second half of the play is really increasingly tragic. And I think one of the things that caught me off guard here is like when you're actually seeing it staged, you're not just listening to the big numbers, but you're watching the staging and the way the story is told on the stage. In a lot of ways, Hamilton doesn't seem like the heart of the play. He is the driving character, but in terms of who is the emotional center of the play, it's two people who Hamilton, through his ambition, through his vanity, ends up kind of mangling. And that's Aaron Burr and his wife, Eliza Schuyler. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that makes Hamilton tricky for me is that, again, in like the Hamilton fandom and discourse and the numbers that tend to get quoted, there's a lot of sort of blind praise of Hamilton in some ways. But I think the story the play is actually telling is this is somebody who pulled people into his orbit and changed their lives, often not for the better, right? Like the first half of the play is sort of the traditional, like the great man's climb. The second half of the play is, this is a guy who, because of his arrogance, because of his vanity, because of the values he inculcates around him, his son ends up getting killed in a duel. Because he thinks this comes with the territory of being Alexander Hamilton's son. He ends up estranged from his wife because he's a faithless husband, and then he makes all the family business public because he's trying to restore his reputation. And then finally, like Aaron Burr, and this is probably where the play takes the most liberties. Like Burr is a way stranger figure than this play makes out. It makes way too much of his relationship with Hamilton. But nevertheless, in the play's version of this, Burr is sort of an ordinary talented guy who has the misfortune of coming in second place behind Hamilton. And watching the staging of this, Hamilton becomes a figure that is harder to sort of celebrate. He comes across as someone who, like, I think the reading that he's kind of out for himself is kind of there in the play, that he kind of doesn't think about how he affects other people. I think that's all there in the staging. It's just weird that it doesn't seem to... That reading doesn't seem to have become the popularly understood.
Yeah, that
one.
is not. That is.
Yeah.
It's immigrants. We get the job done. Right. That is the
Yeah.
popular response to which I would say must be frustrating for Miranda, except it doesn't seem to be. Do you know what I mean? Like,
No.
I've seen interviews with that dude so many times about him talking about how motivated or how inspired he was after reading the biography. Now this is an American character, like without really framing it, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that interview's out there. I just haven't seen it.
See, this is the thing that I was kind of... I think it's easy for Hamilton to take too much shit because of its fan base and because of the cultural phenomenon that built up around it. But at the same time, what I couldn't figure out was, like, yes, the work was adopted by and celebrated by a pretty cynical and vapid class of elites. Because believe me, that is who could afford to see that show in 2016, right? Like tickets were wildly expensive.
They
it was
still do the one thing I will give them is that every single show does have the first 2 rows sold at $10. But it is a lottery.
That's
because
pretty
there's
cool.
So many people.
Yeah, it's a lottery, right? Yeah. Definitely tried to win that lottery for that 1 week when I was like, yeah, I'll go see that.
For sure.
But the question I come away with is like, is the work itself also meant to pander to people like that, right? Because like Lin-Manuel Miranda has spent a lot of his life among that class of people.
Yeah.
Like he is, like his father, Luis, is like he has been a player in New York politics for 40 years. Like he was part of the Ed Koch inner circle. And like Manuel Miranda is a graduate of Hunter College High School, which is an elite like prep school in New York that Chris Hayes, his fellow graduate, uses as an illustration of how meritocracy is becoming completely hollow in the United States in Hayes's book, Twilight of the Elites. And then there's an entire, and the New Ink published a really good piece by Schuyler Rodriguez and Iris DePini over about the Mirandas, father and son, and their kind of complicated relationship with Puerto Rican politics. And so there is this element of, to a degree, you can say, well, Hamilton can't be blamed for the fan base it attracted. But also, you know, was Miranda not also courting exactly that kind of fan base, right? Was he also like writing these numbers and highlighting the notion of Hamilton as, you know, as an immigrant whose bootstrap story is quintessentially about America's ability to include? Is he also courting that? Is he also inviting it and flattering rather than providing any kind of critique? And I think there's a lot of evidence to say that he was.
The thing for me is I don't even need to know his heart. I don't even need to know if he was intentionally writing a musical to court those folks. What seems to be reflected is that his aesthetics have developed in such a sense that is what he made. Do you know what I mean? Like, not to like go back to my old classics of like not really caring about intent and thinking about negligence and thinking about, you know, blurring the line between intent and work and all that stuff. But like I that is what he made. What he made was like a show that had a lot of, black and brown people on stage, but I don't, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember a black or brown character, like outside of the representation of white folks as black and brown folks. What he made was, is that true? Does anyone know off the top of their head?
No, it's 100%
Sally.
true. This is
Sally, sure. Good.
Uh-huh.
So that is, but also I think on top of that, the made a show that the folks that you're talking about who loved it so much were able to. The thing that I ended up taking away from that entire era of our pop cultural thing was like, that's a show that I probably would have loved in 2008 at the height of like Obama center left hope politics. Hey, we can all try to reach this universal American dream. And, to situate myself there too, that was a moment of me like swallowing my pride and moving towards some sort of more centrist pragmatism and also genuinely being moved by seeing Obama's campaign. I was not an Obama supporter at the start of that primary season. I became one over the course of that campaign and then was disappointed for 8 years.
Do you know where and when the first Hamilton show was performed?
No, where was it?
Yep.
In 2009. At the White House as part of their I think it was a poetry symposium of some sort. I forget exactly what, but he performs the opening song then.
And so that had not debuted yet as a show.
that was just like, this is the thing I'm working on right now.
That's wild.
Here's the first song.
So yeah, that is, and so like it reflects to me that a lot of the same stuff we talked about with the newsroom, which is a sort of liberalism that wants to say, hey, liberalism is still valid in 2010. Hey, like there is a story about people who just want to get the job done, who just want to do the work that's necessary to make this country great, and sometimes they have individual problems, but that could be you. You could be the person who steps in front of the plane and reports the news. You could be the person who it doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter what, and literally does that by just recasting historical figures with different races.
Right.
And that never sat right with me because I came to this play after 8 years of the Obama presidency when I had kind of like, bit by bit moved back further and further and further to the left, seeing that the center left and that this promise was not true, seeing that the sort of American dream promised here did not actually apply equally, right? There were still indefinitely extra hurdles, extra costs. And I think part of my just general distaste for the response to this play is that the hope at the heart of it, the hope that there is an America out there for people like us and that we were written into it from the beginning. And this is sort of like revealing that we were written. Like, it's not a rewriting of history that says, what if black and brown people had been counted at the top of the country and forced to be reckoned? This terrible, travesty was forced to be reckoned with. This is just a world in which we say, like, what if we palette swapped?
Right.
And that part of it has never sat right with me because the modern reception of it from liberals specifically has been a sort of like, and now we can spread that myth to everybody. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Go on, Cado.
The only saving grace of that is that materially it is giving jobs to those people.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
It's like, I don't know. Either way, like, it's ultimately, it does feel like even with the like kind of dip in it like near the end where like shit goes bad for him, I still feel like his final like moments in that play turn to his final monologue definitely turns it to be like a kind of tragic character that like almost like circles back around on him being like worth valorizing instead of like putting the pin in like, you fucked up, dude. Like I don't know, so like, yeah, I've listened to that cast recording so many times when it came out and have since had like a very up and down relationship with it. I never actually have even like cams exist, but so like I don't know at all, but I've never watched any of them.
Like
so
the
I don't know
staging
at all
or anything like that.
what that final staging looks like in that monologue or if anything else reads out of that.
Yeah, I mean it's and that's a big part of it. Like I think the frustrating thing about I think there's also something about the nature of the way work like Hamilton becomes a national phenomenon, in that Broadway theater is the most exclusionary medium in the United States, probably, short of high-end gallery pieces, right? But even that's just part of the art world. You can go look at art. It's still part of that. Broadway theaters, Broadway plays are a major cultural output in the United States, and they do affect public discourse, but it is completely beyond the reach of most people, and there is no real attempt to make that accessible by wider audiences. And I think this is one area where things have gotten worse. I remember in the 70s and 80s, public television would air filmings of plays, right? These were not hard to find. You would see recorded performances of plays on TV, and you could watch them, and you could at least take part in that sense, right? It's not the easiest way to experience the medium, because obviously the entire point is you are sitting there watching the staging yourself. The minute you have camera people making those decisions about framing, the work is changing a little bit. But nevertheless, I think 30, 40 years ago, this stuff was maybe a little more accessible. I think all of that's getting more clamped down. People will get to see Hamilton when inevitably a film adaptation is made of Hamilton.
Yeah.
But until then, here's this cast album. Here's a collection of Spotify Hamil drops, and you'll just have to use your imagination.
One second, query. What's a Hamil drop?
Oh. So the Hamilton phenomenon was so big that look, everyone can be in Hamilton. Just imagine the world of Hamilton being a place where tons of popular music acts
I just pulled it off. I can't do this. This is a lot. I knew that mixtape happened.
Yeah.
I knew that mixtape happened.
Did the Decemberists do one on Benjamin Franklin?
That's the first one. That's the first one. You know what? I love any project that can go. Ben Franklin's song, The Decemberists. Wrote My Way Out, remix. Royce to 5'9", Joyner Lucas and Black Thought. That's, okay. If you put Royce and the Decemberists on the same project, I can't complain. I can complain a little bit.
But I mean, this is my point, though.
Boom Goes the Cannon by Mobb Deep. Wow. Okay. That's fine.
There is an element of any Broadway play that is purporting to be about urgent and important ideas in American public life is inherently kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth, right? Because ultimately, Broadway tickets are wildly expensive, and audiences are overwhelmingly white, and by and large they live in New York, right? So this is who tends to find this stuff accessible, and I think that becomes a problem for works like Hamilton that are trying to say, Broadway can be for everyone. We're breaking these stuffy old definitions of Broadway musicals. We're busting them wide open. But who are you busting it wide open to? To the same people who see, all the major shows on Broadway.
What am I looking at? What did you hand me?
That
here?
is just the most recent Hamil
yeah,
drop.
Barack Obama is on the most recent Hamil drop. That's good. I guess I could make you can extend the case that Cado made earlier, which is hey, there are real people of color being paid off this, and you could start to make the case that you're kind of pushing back against here, Rob, that hey, does this change Broadway in 5 or 10 years, over the course of the next few decades? Are there more people of color who get to be show creators, who get to be composers, who get to be showrunners and stuff like that? Does music less like traditional show tunes get to find its footing more so on Broadway? And I think you can give that to Hamilton because of what a huge cultural thing it was. But I also kind of feel like this might be a situation of like, if Hamilton didn't exist, the world would have to create it. Something was going to something on Broadway was going to decide hip hop was the cool new thing, in the same way that something on Broadway had to decide at some point that rock music was the cool new thing, and begin to make that transition. And as is appropriate, it happened 20 years after hip hop was the cool new thing, 30 years after hip hop was the cool new thing, 20 because you said 2008 was the first.
When he made the first song.
So let's say let's
he was right
say 20 and wave our hands a little bit. I also just don't know that is enough, because you know what, I think it's almost appropriate in some ways, right? Like if one of the complaints about Hamilton is it is presenting the same stuffy mythologizing of the founding fathers, except now the founding fathers are black and brown and are immigrants, or are contemporary immigrants instead of immigrants of the day, white immigrants, wherein that term means something much different. Then maybe it's appropriate that also the best possible outcome is the market of Broadway also gets a little more black and brown, but it's still the market of Broadway. It is still this, like you said, Rob, kind of highfalutin, inaccessible media form for people who not only have the monetary access, because like you, Cado, plenty of people can listen to Broadway recordings, cast recordings, stuff like that, but also have the cultural education towards appreciating work like that, right? Like there is very little conversation that happens, I think, about the ways in which aesthetic taste is formed. I guess we've talked before about, hidden curricula and stuff like that, but that applies just as much to taste as it does to knowledge. You don't come into this world knowing what makes a good Broadway musical number. You don't come, out of the womb being like, you know what? I have strong feelings about Guys and Dolls. What you have is like an experience of going through a theater program or watching recordings with people who like them, or being just exposed to a broad variety of music that ends up moving you towards musical theater. There is a particular history of that stuff, and the availability of that stuff is racialized in this country and is also stratified by class. Which is not to say that there are not obviously black and brown fans of musical theater, in the same way that there aren't. It's not to say that there aren't impoverished folks who really love Cats. Motherfuckers love Cats.
Yeah,
I saw Cats. It was an experience, and that is true. But also, in the same way that access to any high form of cultural production is gated, that is also the case with Broadway stuff. And so the idea of now the gate is brown is just doesn't quite move my heart, but feels almost appropriate for the work. I don't know. It has been a weird decade of Hamilton.
Yeah. If they wait the same amount of time, we will have a Hamilton
2
Hamilton movie.
Hamilton.
When did Hamilton actually drop?
2015.
2015. So
that's when it opened to the public.
2025. Yeah.
2025.
I did that math
there
right.
Will be
It's 2020 now.
Yeah.
Wait, no, sorry. I did not do that math right at all. Add 15 years to 2030.
For what?
Are you trying to do the In the Heights interval?
Yeah, the In the Heights interval.
Yeah.
In the Heights dropped in 2005, and the movie is coming out this year, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the Jesus Christ Superstar thing? Because I feel like that is much quicker, but maybe I'm wrong.
I feel like they've always been kind of it's definitely after the initial runs, right?
73 was the Jesus Christ Superstar film, which was only 3 years.
3 years, wow.
Yeah,
That's
that
fast.
is surprising.
That's very fast. Which also I think speaks to maybe why that the recording of that film's soundtrack is so popular, is there was not the same time for the cast recording to dominate.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
We'll get a Hamilton. We're gonna get that movie. We're gonna unless In the Heights completely bombs,
I doubt
which I doubt it will.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. Also.
No, I mean, inevitably, we're going to get that movie. I suspect it is more a matter of waiting for the traveling shows to suck up every penny.
Is it also a matter of waiting for the next presidential election? Like when we're out of Trumpian politics and can post whatever this wave of cynicism about the country is,
right.
In terms of the bookmaker mind.
Right. That might be when we see something like that. But yeah, it was like, I'm glad I finally saw it. Like, I was in this weird place where I had feelings about Hamilton because I listened to the cast album. I was curious if they would change seeing it staged, and like, it's a good Broadway show, and that's the weird thing. It's when you try to make it more than that that you start running into problems.
Yeah,
like,
I'd see it. Yeah.
It has good numbers.
I'd
like,
pay
there's
$10.
moments like
I'd get into that lottery.
There's moments in the second act that hit me like a gut punch.
Yeah.
And I think it really is kind of brilliant to have Jefferson sort of turned into a deeply oily opportunist in terms of his presentation. Comes back from Europe, basically, doing traditional, doing almost like swing. And then he's like, oh, everyone's rapping. I can rap. And he turns into sort of a Andre 3000 type figure. But then you have the problem of, but we know a lot of things about Jefferson now. And he's not just an oily opportunist, right? He's not just an oily like Paul. He's just a nightmarish slave owner and rapist. So it's one of those, like, there are good beats in this play as a piece of staging, as a piece of performance. It really works. But at every turn, you're kind of left wondering, like, what is this really doing? What interest is it really serving? And I don't think any of the fandom it attracted did it any favors, but may have revealed it in some really crucial ways.
I wish I'd heard it before it blew up. That's I think, like, to some degree, the expectations are what killed this thing for me. Is that by the time I listened to it, it was because there was this writhing mass of fans who said it was this incredible, moving picture of blah, 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 blah.
I got lucky. My sister's in musical theater, so she was just like, yo,
listen to this right now. This is big. This is going to get big.
Yeah.
Totally. That's like, yo, do you like hip hop? You want to buy my mixtape outside of the Tower Records, outside the Virgin Records or whatever, right? Like, that's that vibe would have gotten me. Like,
right.
Because then you end up having the thing where, like, even I would have mythologized lin-manuel Miranda in that way, especially if you don't know what his history is. You don't know what family he comes from or what his family's politics have been or blah, blah, blah. You end up just being like, whoa, like, this brown dude from here made this? Wild. Cool. Let me listen to this. And instead, I came into it already having the baggage of what it supposedly meant to people. And that was always going to kind of make it a poison tree in some sense because it had to do more. Like, there's a world in which it feels like if I had thought about it like one of the movies made by the children of home movies, I'd be like, yo, this is cool. You know what I mean? Like, this guy just made this thing? Awesome. Wow, it's on Broadway?
Yeah.
Crazy. Wow, look at you. Brother, let's go. Let's get it. But instead, it was like President Bartlett's favorite musical. You know what I mean? So I had to come into it with that vibe. So
You think lin-manuel Miranda likes the newsroom?
I bet we could find lin-manuel Miranda. Do you think he ever followed that fake McAvoy account? What was the name of that? Was that the guy? That's Will
McAvoy, ACN?
Yeah. I bet. Do you remember the internet? Do you remember Twitter?
God.
Whew. Anyway.
That was what a weird bit the newsroom Twitter LARP was. And like that the Will McAvoy character tried to weigh in on news of the day as if they were it was just
yeah.
Mwah.
I just want to just as a note here, tweet from 2012, lin_manuel. Third episode of Newsroom equals structure of Bartlett for America. I am totally fine with this, and I want to punch everyone in the face with facts now. So.
That is rough. That's
yeah.
I mean, but this was so many people's liberalism.
I know it was.
This was like, and I think this is one of the other. And I think this
finally
is
sat down with breakfast. Finally sat down for breakfast with Sorkin. He doesn't know I'm wearing a Bartlett shirt under this hoodie. August 18th, 2017.
2017.
It happens. It is the thing.
I mean, I will admit to liking The West Wing back in the day.
Yeah, no, listen, we've been through this.
Look, I still love all that shit. I see awful things in it now.
Right.
But I'm still like, oh yeah, I can quote chapter and verse from that shit.
Right, well, like you almost, it's, yeah, we could get into it. We could get into it. We already got into it.
Yeah.
But there's the degree to which it is, you're almost poised to like that. Like it is, again, there is a cultural education that is hard to pull away from, even if you wanted to. We have to stop.
Fuck it. Let's get into it.
Wait,
Just real quick.
Can we take a break and let me run to the bathroom first, and then we can get into it? Because we're not going to get into it real quick. Let's take a break.
We're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna settle this like West Wing style centrism debate real fast.
That's all, real quick.
And then we're gonna hit Knives Out spoilers.
Unbelievable. All right, we'll be right back. Bye.
So, I think to what you just cited, that Miranda tweet about coming out of the third episode of the newsroom and ready to punch people in the face with like facts and reason.
Facts.
Yeah,
heard about these? What is the third? Do you know offhand what the third episode was?
No, I don't. It
doesn't matter. Like I want to be.
Fukushima was going to go sideways from the first minute.
That might have been right. That might be right. No, this summary doesn't actually give me anything. It's all about the internal stuff. Like it's not. There's no.
The second season of the newsroom that was almost all right. God. But that's the one where they fuck up badly and nearly get taken
After
off
an
the
American
air,
jet is downed in the Mideast, President Bartlett urges an attack that could result in thousands of casualties.
No, that's
West Wing.
Wait, what?
You're looking at the West Wing.
I thought you said my brain.
No, that's the one where Morris Tolliver is killed by the Syrian Defense Ministry. And
wow, you had that on deck, huh? You were like, boom, got it.
Damn.
Yep.
Anyway. Yes. Just real quick, what I want to be clear about is I'm not like, and we should cancel lin-manuel Miranda because he made a tweet where he was like, I like the newsroom. Like whatever, I don't give a fuck. Obviously, but that's not exactly. But
it's a theory of politics.
Yes, that is exactly it. Yes,
it's a theory of politics and a theory of change, and I think this is one of the really frustrating and deeply fraught things in progressive politics at this moment. Is that there was a theory of politics and political change and policymaking that I think, to a degree, at its most facile, was sort of typified by things like the West Wing. We're going to make apolitical decisions, just guided by good sense data, right? And we're going to bear in mind the well-being of all people, not just white men, but all people. And via that process and via winning argument after argument, because our policies are the best. They combine the best of traditional populist, like FDR style approaches with the logic and efficiency of markets. There was an entire theory of change in politics around this that I think it was very easy to sort of fall into in the 90s. And the West Wing in many ways typified it. And in a lot of ways, the change that was posited by that theory was very much someone like Obama. Obama is as close as you're probably going to see to a President Bartlett-like figure. And in a lot of ways, not just because his administration was notoriously like lousy with West Wing fans, but also in terms of the policy positions Obama tended to adopt and the compromises he tended to seek out. often looked a lot like what you might imagine, a Bartlett type figure would do. And I think one of the real dividing lines is there are people who really do feel that the Obama years were good. They were fine. That was how things were supposed to work. It was good for America. A lot of problems were fixed or at least ameliorated during that period. And there are people who look at that period as both one of massive missed opportunity, crushing disappointment, and a pretty irreversible verdict on the viability of that theory of change.
Well, and I think an insistence that however much was ameliorated, there was still much, much more left to go. And
yes,
I think, frankly, a group of folks for whom there was very little left to go. That haven't we done it? Haven't we gotten there? Basically, haven't we made it so that the world, so that the high highs of the American elites can be pierced by anyone in this country? Haven't we invested already in Sure, there are outliers, but these are outliers. This isn't systemic anymore. This is individual acts of corruption, which we should absolutely step in and intercede with. But the system works. You just got to keep it clean. And I think what you ended up coming out was like, yes, or for me at least, I came away from that period thinking, one, that system of change will never be able to, or that style of change, that particular progressive mode of change will never actually address those larger systemic issues, and will be satisfied. Will be like procedurally satisfied. I don't mean individual actors will be satisfied with the degree of change that can come out of that model of progressive politics, but the literal mechanisms are satiated by basically making it where we can basically get to, and then we'll deal with what they consider edge cases, instead of understanding what they think of as edge cases as being systemic or as being natural outgrowths of the system that it's now defending. And that, like you said, I think is so wrapped up in this particular style of liberal politics.
And I think it becomes really difficult to have an honest conversation about, because the apotheosis of that theory of politics is also America's first black president.
Right. Absolutely.
And I think that is a figure that in some ways correctly we view as transformational, but also in some really key ways is not a transformational figure.
Or we only count the transformational ways that are good. We don't count, for instance, the transformation of executive privilege, of the degrees to which the president can unilaterally decide to take the lives of other people across, in other nation states, which there was an opportunity to draw a line in the sand and say, hey, the previous administration did that. That is not inherent to what it means to be the president. And instead, we had a transformational presidency, where in fact, now that is the case. We could have had a presidency that put at first and foremost the removal of our troops in the Middle East in an ongoing war against ? And instead, we had a transformational presidency, one in which that became a fact of life instead of a blip on the long timeline. And of course, it wouldn't be just a blip, because the United States has basically always been at war anyway.
But I think you can't get away from the fact that Obama, sort of his origin story as a national political figure is, yes, there's the speech he gives at the 2004 Democratic Convention.
Yeah.
But then how does he beat Hillary? It is because he is the one who didn't vote for the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Like totally. He is the person saying this was a colossal mistake and we need to never make these mistakes again. And he basically embraces the anti-war wing of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, rides
that to a primary victory.
Absolutely. Running specifically on positioning Hillary as a hawk, which she is, to be clear, 100%.
Yes.
And yet, what we end up having is a sort of presidency built around the Carcetti eat shit scene of like, you know what?
Yes.
You got to make compromises, buddy. But almost being like, all right, where's my spoon? You know what I mean? Like time to dig in, which is I think if maybe I have a single major criticism of the Obama presidency, it is that enthusiasm to compromise, that enthusiasm, which is based off of a misheld belief that there would be a degree to which hey, you know what? We did it. I did enough compromising. Now we get healthcare the right way or something.
Yeah, and I think where this sort of ties into the sort of liberalism represented by Hamilton is there's a great deal of complacency in that worldview, and a great deal of shut the fuck up and let the elites handle their business. Yeah. And the well-meaning elites will take care of things for you, but stop whining about your goddamn house being foreclosed on.
And they might have disagreements, but let them work it out. They are representing the They're almost like stand-ins for you and your issues, right? Like, yes, the bank will have a representative, but guess what? I'm your representative, and the two of us are going to duke it out, literally, actually, at a certain point, and that's going to be the thing. Like, we are fighting so that you don't have to shut up.
Yeah. And so I think that becomes, part of the backlash of Hamilton and this theory is that Hamilton very much represents isn't it enough to have a more representative looking group of people at the top, right? The substance doesn't necessarily have to change. Hamilton is literally, what if, as you said, palette swap? What if all these people establishing a slaveholding, white supremacist, expansionist colonial state, hey, what if they're all like Black and Latino dudes from New York? Wouldn't that be awesome? And I'm like, there was a shock. Could they not?
I think it's supposed to be a shock. It's supposed to be a like, boom, that's weird, right? It makes you think. And again, I think that works in 2007. I think that would have worked for me. 2008, and then as a student project, as like an amateur work, or even just as a thing that exists but hasn't been lionized to the degree that it has, that would have worked for me. A lot of this conversation is reminding me of a thread I just saw that I think is circles around this idea that a lot of the stuff that we're criticizing is actually deeply attractive to us, either because we want to listen to it countless times, because it appeals to us. Did you see this thread from Jonathan Wilson on Star Trek: The Next Generation the other day? Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read it because I think it's worth reading, and it's worth setting up for the audience who probably didn't see this thread from this PhD in history, this freelance professor. Star Trek: The Next Generation is very seductive nostalgia, being a show about a colonialist government that is tolerant, competent, and possessed of effectively infinite wealth and military power, or in other words, a stand-in for the United States of the 1990s. You just know that behind all of the seamlessly inoperable hardware and software, there's an industrial standards organization that rules the galaxy with a rod of iron. Photon torpedoes are just cruise missiles, but it took J.J. Abrams of all people to make it explicit. The Next Generation is soothing because it's an idealized self-portrait of the society that created the Clapper. Which is just brutal. Love it. To all the people in my mentions, the Federation is colonialist because every second episode involves a literal Federation colony. The Federation is largely a network of colonies and outposts held together by a fleet. Pay at least a minimal attention here. Some people have countered that the Federation is supposed to be a contrast to the 1990s United States, and that's true in terms of conscious intent, which is why I'm pointing out that it totally fails on that basis in hindsight. It's a utopian and critical self-portrait, but it's still a self-portrait, down to the ways that it promotes the denial of the obvious. For example, the Federation Empire's ludicrous denials that its heavily armed fleet is a military force, or that humans enjoy supremacy in the Federation. The other thing that comes up in replies is the Prime Directive. It doesn't change the structure of the Federation, but it does disprove charges of colonial. Does it disprove charges of colonial aggression? Maybe, but only in the way the principle of national sovereignty is today, imperfectly to say the least. At best, the Prime Directive protects only a narrow kind of people, humanoid civilizations that aren't too humanoid and civilized. At worst, it's treated as pure fiction in practice. But the Prime Directive is mostly irrelevant to my thesis anyway, since Federation colonialism is based on the same cultural myth of abundant, empty land that European colonialism was. In the beginning, as John Locke says, all the galaxy was America. So, The Next Generation has a really interesting blend of Euro-Americans' most romantic notions of historical European colonialism, or what they think it should have been, with an idealization of their own society and its power systems in the age of the end of history and democratic enlargement. It is very seductive for Americans of my generations, or thereabouts, raised on a set of powerful old cultural myths and contemporary expectations of real-life greatness, to game out that mix of historical phenomena as they should have been. I'm not being ironic. Psychologically speaking, speaking, it's attractive. I genuinely like The Next Generation. It's a fantasy of being the anti-colonial colonizer, the liberating empire, the same fantasy I grew up with for America's place in the world. Really quick, I want to add on this last thing from a different Jonathan Corman, who adds, it is an attempt at a framework which enables us to reframe the colonialist stories of adventure without the moral horror of colonialism, but it only gives us a sanitized colonialism which justifies it. And this was like such a fascinating read for me as someone who comes up with The Next Generation, right? Like the two things I did every Monday night were watch the WWE Raw and then watch the episode of Next Generation that came on right after it. I watched so many reruns of Next Generation. Then when I got to college, went back and watched the original series. Have since obviously watched a lot of Deep Space Nine and some Voyager. Never got around to Enterprise. Yeah. Only watched the first of the J.J. Abrams movies. I think I watched all of the other films. I think I watched every Star Trek film pre J.J. Abrams. And I think this is super interesting coming into what's about to launch, which is Picard, the show that seems poised, and all of my favorite Star Trek friends are very worried that that's going to be Picard as Will McAvoy, that's going to be Picard as, like, not my Federation. The premise of this new show seems to be they're going to do 9/11 in space, Rob. There's synthetics on Mars have attacked, and Picard is somehow breaking with the Federation over the response. Seems to be the pitch that the show has been making. And so there's a real chance that what we're going to get is Picard as, now in the 90s, we did things different under, the true third way Federation. But I think the heart of this thing that makes it so interesting to me is the ways in which I can read this critique. I think it's 100% true. And also, if you put on a Next Generation episode right now, I would just be completely lean forward. Like, even when I've seen 5 or 6 times, because the form is so seductive. The elements of mystery, the elements of expertise. It is that Plotzian belief in, the elites being able to work things out, and the elites in this case are the crew of the Starship Enterprise, and they're elite because they've been trained by a system made to build elites. And it is so hard to, not hard, but it is so worth doing to try to recognize that in yourself, that attraction, and still maintain a degree of criticality. But what I've never been able to do with something like Star Trek is like turn it off all the way. It will always still get me, I think. And I suspect that's true for many people, and Sorkin. I suspect that's true for many people, and Hamilton, or a million other things.
Yeah, I mean, like, I probably never fully turn against a lot of the stuff because the packaging is seductive. What I begin finding interesting about it as I grow older and my worldview changes and a lot of the stuff remains a little bit static, is it is more obvious now the workings of the rhetoric of these products, of these shows, and they are illuminating in different ways, and I find that kind of helpful to revisit because you still hear echoes of this a lot of times, right? Like, a lot of people making decisions now, a lot of people in important positions now, when they speak, in some way they are informed by these cultural experiences. You will hear echoes of Sorkin liberalism among Democratic progressive politicians pretty routinely, right? You will hear that. You will hear when people talk about America's obligations abroad. You will hear echoes of Federation officers speaking about their mission and what is owed to the galaxy. And I think it is useful to, like, I look back at this stuff, and frequently I think the thing I marvel at the most is how wild some of it is to me now, and how normal it made it seem at the time, right? The things that you would hear characters just straight up say, and it didn't raise an eyebrow. Whereas now, like in The West Wing, there's the famous episode where Toby chews out the World Trade Organization protesters and basically like complains about how they're just a bunch of dumb college students who need to get off his lawn and they don't know shit about trade because it's such a complicated thing. They should just leave it to the experts. And now from the vantage of a hollowed out American economy and massively like disenfranchised laboring classes or people, you know, trapped in the gig economy in a permanent state of precarity, that scene, which at the time was like, yeah, Toby, put those fucking hippies in their place. Now you look at that scene and you're like, holy shit, what was this show on?
Yeah, it is the benefit, I think, of us I mean, this is the thing that ends up happening, right? Is like once you start talking about taste being produced, once you start thinking about like, hey, the reason that I love Next Generation, the reason that I responded so well to Sorkin, you know, in the era where I did respond well to Sorkin, was because of being put through certain systems of education, formal and informal. And so too it is for my distaste of Sorkin now. So too is it of my criticality of the same Trek, you know, episodes that I was and still am wrapped by, even though now I'm like, and that ends up introducing a really difficult question, which is like, how do you and I and Cado, and then also the listener, do the one recognize when that sort of cultural education is happening, become active in the process instead of a passive recipient of taste, but an active like collaborator with taste, with your own internal taste making, and then two, like how do you shift those conversations? How do you move the boundaries? I think part of the thing is for us as creators is you try to add your voice to that space. You try to like, you know, use the pathways that were built to deliver really anodyne shit and try to send stuff down those pathways that are a little bit more challenging and a little bit more that might even feel repulsive to a certain subset of folks, but are trying to push a conversation a certain way. I mean, this is to the degree that I'm sympathetic toward the so-called dirtbag left. Like, I get that that's how you arrive there, is that like, hey, we have to fucking shake this thing from its very core. And I think that like that is a really difficult mission, and it's a mission that I think ends up with a lot of misstep along the way. And I don't just mean like problematic misstep. I mean like it's easy to make art that no one likes because you're so bounded in by genre expectations. In some ways, I'm unintentionally pivoting here because what I'm thinking about right now is Chandler's essay, right? On the simple art of murder. That's what it's called, right? The simple art of murder.
Yep.
In which Chandler kind of draws this line between two styles. I mean, he's actually very good in the essay itself about being like, listen, I'm going to say Hammett, but I don't just mean Hammett. I'm going to say, you know, the name of Christie. I know Christie, but I was going to try to say somebody else. But I'm going to say Christie, but I don't just mean
there's the
Christie.
third one he cites at great length that nobody remembers.
Right. There's the third one. Is that the third one where he's like a beat-by-beat breakdown of this terrible mystery? And I forget the person's name. And does try to basically suggest that the realism in Dashiell Hammett style hardboiled detective fiction, the new American school of detective story, is a shock to the system of literature writ large, but especially detective fiction, and that is a project worth pursuing because there's something even past that. Right? As a summary to this article or to this essay that he wrote in the 1940s, he's basically saying, hey, the old style of detective fiction, the prized style, in which a sort of charming or doddering detective comes to a quaint town of upper middle class British folks, or is on a boat with foreign dignitaries, and someone dies, and there is a very novel solution to the crime. Maybe there's a duplicate, a twin. Maybe there has been someone has been framed. Maybe someone has been poisoned in a unique way. Fails to represent the reality of life, right? The famous line from it is something like, God, what is it, Rob? Do you know the one I'm thinking about? About Hammett giving murder back to the people who do it. something like that, right? And then he pivots to talk about the kind of value of the hard-boiled detective novel as being about the fear that comes from, or being about like the real difficult case, which is the murder not planned for a decade, not the secret machinations of someone who thinks themselves a genius, but the murder decided 2 minutes before it happens, and that is the real interesting story, the story that connects to real people, to real life. But then he has this third movement that I don't actually see represented in summaries that often, in which he says even Hammett's work, theoretically even Chandler's work, is only a stepping stone, because all it does is prove that the form could take on a third set of mysteries, a third set of murderers. And what he means by that, and what he says by that, is corruption all around us, is the corrupt senator, is the landlord, is the elite who is secretly a murderer, or who is stealing money from their tenants, or who is doing the same crimes that they may claim that they are rallying against. And that is the sort of fiction that he hopes follows once proven out by hard-boiled detective fiction, but is still presumably written in the tongue of America, right? It's still written in the average tongue, still written in a literary style that is...
Can I quote the Hammett passage?
Please, absolutely. Go for it.
He is, not the Hammett, the Chandler passage.
Yeah,
he's so fucking good. Hammett gave murder back to the kind of people that commit it for reasons, not just to provide a corpse, and with the means at hand, not with hand-wrought dueling pistols, curare, or tropical fish. He put these people down on paper as they are, and he made them talk and think in the language they customarily used for these purposes. He had style, but his audience didn't know it, because it was in a language that was not supposed to be capable of such refinements. They thought they were getting a good, meaty melodrama written in the kind of lingo they imagined they spoke themselves. It was, in a sense, but it was much more.
So good. This essay is available for free. It's called The Simple Art of Murder. It was written in 1950. And I will also just add to that, because I will also read this last little bit here. He's describing but all of this, and Hammett too, is for me not quite enough. The realist in Murder writes of a world in which gangsters can rule nations and almost rule cities, in which hotels and apartment houses and celebrated restaurants are owned by men who made their money out of brothels, in which a screen star can be the finger man for a mob, and the nice man down the hall is a boss of the numbers racket. A world where a judge with a cellar full of bootleg liquor can send a man to jail for having a pint in his pocket, where the mayor of your town may have condoned murder as an instrument of money-making, where no man can walk down a dark street in safety because law and order are things we talk about but refrain from practicing. A world where you may witness a holdup in broad daylight and see who did it, but you will fade quickly back into the crowd rather than tell anyone, because the holdup men may have friends with long guns, where the police may not like your testimony, and in any case the shyster for the defense will be allowed to abuse and vilify you in open court before a jury of selected morons without any but the most perfunctory interference from a political judge. It's not a very fragrant world, but it's the world you live in, and certain writers with tough minds and cool spirit of detachment can make very interesting and even amusing patterns out of it. It is not funny that a man should be killed, but it sometimes is funny that he should be killed for so little, and that his death should be the coin of what we call civilization. All this still is not quite enough. In everything that can be called art, there is a quality of redemption. It may be pure tragedy, if it is high tragedy, and it may be pity and irony, and it may be the raucous laughter of the strong man. But down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid. The detective in this kind of story must be such a man. He is the hero, he is everything. He must be a complete man and a common man, and yet an unusual man. He must be, to use the rather weathered phrase, a man of honor, by instinct, by inevitability, without thought of it, and certainly without saying it. He must be the best man in the world, and a good enough man for any world. I do not care much about his private life. He is neither a eunuch nor a satyr. I think he may seduce a duchess, and I'm quite sure he would not spoil a virgin. If he is a man of honor in one thing, he is in all things. He is a relatively poor man, or he would not be a detective at all. He is a common man, or he could not go among common people. He has a sense of character, or he would not know his job. He will take no man's money dishonestly, and no man's insolence without a due and dispassionate revenge. He is a lonely man, and his pride is that you will treat him as a proud man, or be very sorry you ever saw him. He talks as the man of his age talks, that is, with rude wit, a lively sense of the grotesque, a disgust for sham, and a contempt for pettiness. The story is his adventure in search of a hidden truth, and it would be no adventure if it did not happen to a man fit for adventure. He has a range of awareness that startles you, but it belongs to him by right because it belongs to the world he lives in. If there were enough like him, I think the world would be a very safe place to live in, yet not too dull to be worth living in. And I read that in length because I think I want to present Chandler in full here because there's stuff in there that I think in 2019 or 2020 you absolutely roll your eyes at, right? The heart of this is still a sort of chauvinistic Americanism, a sort of like if only there were enough good men in the world who called a lie a lie. Like McAvoy is in here. He doesn't know it yet, right? But Sorkin reads this and goes, "How do I make a man like that in the newsroom?" But at the same time, the heart of it is actually what Sorkin leaves out is a common man, right? What Sorkin leaves out is Sorkin wants the heroism of this person, but not the pettiness necessarily. Or he might reframe the pettiness as heroism, which I don't quite think Chandler is doing here. And I think that that desire, again, is really compelling. The desire to kind of muddy the stories that we're telling. And yet, is there not something attractive about the clean murder mystery, the murder mystery that is solvable by you, the reader, even if, or that actually stifles you, the reader, even if a detective would have solved it instantly, as Chandler lays out when criticizing the British detective story. And it's for that reason that I think Knives Out is so interesting, because Knives Out is a movie, Rian Johnson's movie from late last year, that both wants to muddy the water a little bit and also be this kind of neat toy, this neat puzzle box, even if it early on in that film decides to try to pretend like it's not going to be a puzzle box. And I'm curious what y'all both think about that movie. Obviously, I'm curious what your individual histories are with detective fiction in general, and whether or not really my real question at the end of the day is like, do you think it does this thing Chandler demands that good detective fiction do, or is it happy to work in this previous model, the kind of British model of being a kind of quaint amusement, a sort of escapist fantasy, though of course in this essay Chandler also is like, it's all fucking escapist fantasy, man. Where are you escaping to? What are you escaping from? That's right. What's interesting and what's important. Anyway, both of you, I'm curious, y'all both saw it.
Yeah, I don't have like barely any history with detective fiction, really, outside of like the things that bubble up to like most mainstream stuff, like the odd Sherlocks or whatever.
Yeah, okay.
And really, the thing that struck me about this movie was, to me, the mystery was never about the murder, and that's kind of hinted up at the head. But
we should say right now again, we are definitely we're going all spoilers.
Yeah, this is
right?
total. This is oops
all spoilers. Rob, you're good with that? You're good with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where they basically reveal what happened, like how the person died, right? From that point on, I really felt that, or I personally felt like the more interesting mystery was the levels to which each individual family member was or was not racist.
Yeah. The answer is all of them. Yeah, the answer is don't trust rich white folks.
Yeah.
I don't care what their degrees say.
Yeah.
I don't care who they voted for.
Yes. It's actually that specific character that I think you're referencing, the I forget what side of the family she's on, but she's like going to college.
Yeah.
The patriarch of the family, who is the person who dies, was paying for her
Catherine
college.
Langford's
Can we set up the movie for
we should do the
for people who haven't seen it but don't care about spoilers. The premise of this movie, Rob, you just saw it again. Can you set up the premise of the story instead of me? Because it's been
absolutely
a month or two since I've seen it.
Yeah, so Knives Out is the latest film from Rian Johnson, who's obviously director of The Last Jedi, which we discussed at length the other week. Also a bit of a genre specialist and nerd, I think.
Oh, yeah.
To the point about, we were talking about hard-boiled detective fiction. Rian Johnson's also made that mystery film.
Oh, yeah.
he made it as Brick, and he straight-facedly set the entire thing in a high school.
It's so fucking wild. That I've not seen that movie in probably a decade now, maybe 8 years, something like that. Maybe I was in grad school. I did a rewatch of it. That is a film that so I watched that movie when it first came out in the mid 2000s, and then I watched a bunch of other. Neo noir had a moment, and high school neo noir specifically had a moment with Veronica Mars and some other stuff. And to go from Brick to Veronica Mars back to Brick is wild, because when you say he straight faced it, Brick is just, they are talking like Dashiell Hammett characters. Yeah, in Patter. There's that scene where like he's suddenly at someone's party and it's like a Gatsby party. And there's a woman, I don't even remember what the girl says, but like she has the patter of Daisy. Do you know what I mean? From The Great Gatsby. She has the patter of every femme fatale from every hardboiled detective story. And also is in the dress in a dress to boot. I don't know where the parents are. I don't think they exist. And I need to go back and watch it now that Riverdale's out. I mean, they don't. Right? There's like a principal or something, but that's it. Anyway.
Well, the principal. The principal is basically the chief of police.
Right. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
the movie opens with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character.
Right.
Is sort of your quintessential high school burnout, and is sort of sitting apart from high school society. And the principal comes and hauls him down to the office and puts him on this case, which is that a student has disappeared or died, I think. And they have this exchange where Joseph Gordon-Levitt is like, why don't you just get your bulls to do it? Oh, I know, because you can't send the bulls running through these halls or else the people are going to get... And he just starts like unpacking the political dimension of the principal's job. And by the bulls, he means like hall monitors and other teachers. Like it's the principal is the chief of police, and the administrative staff of the school are basically like the police and city workers of this society. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt, the burnout, is the hard-boiled PI. It's such a weird and good movie, and that's sort of that's how Rian Johnson takes on the hard-boiled noir. With Knives Out, he's taking on a very different sort of mystery, the whodunit mystery. And we talked about this a little bit with when we talked about Ordeal by Innocence last year, which was that really good Agatha Christie adaptation that aired on Amazon. And the nature of the whodunit, it's very much the sort of mystery that Chandler opens up kind of critiquing. They are puzzle boxes. The entire nature of a whodunit is you have someone gets it in the neck, and then you have a gallery of different characters who are in that victim's orbit, who all had plausible motives to wish that person ill, but they also have what appear to be hard to disprove alibis. And so the mystery of how did this person who suffered this improbable crime, how did they end up, like, why were they killed, and then who actually engineered it in such an ingenious fashion. Now, oftentimes the ingenious fashion is really unsatisfying. I think this is one of the things that Chandler is critiquing. A lot of these puzzle boxes have really unsatisfying solutions. Murder on the Orient Express, I think, is your most notorious example. Hercule Poirot is confronted with a murder on a train where nobody could have escaped, nobody could have come from outside. Like, somewhere on this train is the murderer, but no single person could possibly be the murderer.
Do you want to? Real quick, we're going to spoil Murder on the Orient Express.
Damn.
Just as a heads up.
Best you know going in, because it's infuriating. The solution to the mystery is that literally everyone on the train
Shut the fuck up.
Yeah. Dude. It's a conspiracy from the jump.
God
basically,
damn it.
the real Lindbergh baby kidnapper was on this train, and people are like, not on my luxury sleeper train across Europe.
They all have like a specific connection to the killer and the fake Lindberghs, basically. And I think there's like it's such an exact example of the thing that Chandler is talking to here, which is like there is the illusion of social commentary in that story, in which there's corrupt police and, police that didn't do their job right, and are people compelled to take justice in their own hands?
But also it's the 47 Ronin where all the staff just love their masters so much.
Yeah.
Look, I was just a chauffeur, but like once they broke my master's heart, I have spent the last 15 years arranging this.
Right.
We all went our separate ways
and it's
to
also,
arrange this murder.
It's also trolley problem philosophy, right? It's like the worst sort of like, now let's have, okay, what if there was a situation where just hypothetically, I know that morality doesn't exist in hypotheticals and that real world ethics are constantly compromised by their contexts, that you have to take into account the socioeconomic reality of a situation. But what if we were on a train and there was a shitty guy on that train who we all knew was shitty, and also we killed him, if not for that troublesome Belgian who was on the train with us because he had to go because he got a call to say he had to go home, and he was on the train because of a favor, and then he solves it and it's all us. But then the trolley problem is, what do you do? What if they were justified in the killing, huh? What do you ever think about that, Poirot? Huh? Did you? And he thinks about it and he makes a decision. And I'll leave that to your imaginations. But anyway, I like that style of just to get to what the thing I'm actually trying to say there is that however entertaining that stuff can be, it often feels like a lesson. Like it often wants to dress itself up in the clothing of a lesson, or the clothing of like deep introspective analysis of the social, when in fact what it is like a fun amusement park ride. And I guess if you're Rob, a very frustrating one.
Well, no, I think that's a case of one of the most celebrated works in the genre, and most famous works, ends up being one of the weakest examples.
Yeah,
like
sure.
when this nature of mystery really works, when it truly is well plotted and like deeply mysterious as to how someone got dead and how someone arranged for that to happen, like this can be really satisfying. But I do think, as a general rule, what these things do lack is any sort of really pointed social commentary. Now, Rian Johnson might disagree. I was listening to the commentary, and one of the arguments he makes is that inherent to this form is that there's a degree of social commentary because it compresses class. That the quintessential form is there are servants, there are laborers, there are bourgeoisie, there are people at the top of the social hierarchy as well. They're all, by the constraints of these stories, forced into contact, and we are forced to consider the connections and grudges they might bear toward one another.
Right.
I think where this is really explicit is like in a film like Gosford Park, which is basically this is an Altman take on it. It's entirely playing around with this idea of there being an upstairs and a downstairs society, and there are a lot of invisible connections between them. Rian Johnson is playing around with all of those traditions, but he's also, I think, trying to do something else. This is, in many ways, I think, intended to be a companion piece to Get Out. I think, like, just from the title, Knives Out, echoing Get Out, you got Lakeith Stanfield, who is in the film, says Get Out multiple times, but I think the play is the movie is also deeply concerned about these elements of class and white privilege and white supremacy in the United States, all through the lens of, and here is the setup that Austin asked me for 30 minutes ago. A famous pulp mystery writer, was it Walton Thrombey?
That sounds right.
Yeah, Thrombey.
Yeah, Harlan Thrombey. Oh, like Harlan Ellison. Harlan Thrombey is found dead one morning in his very spooky and gothic mansion, and it appears to be suicide. He appears to have cut his own throat during the night. And then a week later, all the people who surrounded him, his extended family, and his nurse, Marta Cabrera, played by Ana de Armas, are reconvened to be re-interviewed about the night before he died, and whether or not this was truly a suicide, or whether perhaps there is a murder being swept under the rug and something that was made to look like a suicide. And that at first feels like the mystery we're going to be getting, right? Somebody cleverly disguised a murder as a suicide.
Right. And it has all of the trappings. It has all of the trappings. Giant house with, innumerable rooms and passages, a cast of characters who all have motives to hate each other and potentially...
They're introduced with title cards.
Yes, 100%.
So you don't forget.
And also to, I think, paint the picture in your head that what you're about to get is like a closed door mystery, right? Is the sort of like, all right, and then the detective is going to show up and lock the door and say, no one leaves this house until we figure out who did it. I believe there's a murderer here. And you get that vibe. Like, that is the vibe of the story that you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to settle in. Like, this is going to be a Mrs. Marple type situation where, like, everyone is gathered and then bit by bit, the genius detective breaks through all of the lies and reveals the truth at the heart of it. And then that isn't really what... I mean, there is an element of that still.
Right.
But that is not the path the story takes.
I think Linda Holmes over at NPR wrote something pretty good about this. I think she identifies the structure of this movie in many ways addresses, I'm paraphrasing here, but I'll get to a quote in a second. It addresses a lot of the issues that can come up with this sort of mystery, right? Like at a certain point, you need to stop chasing red herrings. It gets frustrating to constantly see the detective spun in circles and re-interview the same people. And it feels like stories like this can sometimes lose a bit of momentum because in between the setup and the payoff, there's just a lot of churn to mark time. And what Linda Holmes writes is what Rian Johnson has done here is a masterful feat of balance, staying within the rules of the creaky old house genre, but making just enough adjustments to stay clear of story trouble. Because story trouble isn't uncommon in a film like this. There's only so long it's fun to watch people accuse each other while clues accumulate and red herrings fly before you start to want something to happen, something to be revealed. In Knives Out, there's not just one information dump, there are several. The twists are plentiful enough that even if some ungenerous person tried to spoil the film for you, they couldn't really. You'd still be missing chapters upon chapters of necessary information. I think that's true. I think it has 3 phases it goes through, and there's a reveal at each.
Yeah, and I think the other structural thing that it does by taking the mystery out of the house is address one of the other kind of easy complaints to make about this particular style of whodunit, which is that the world outside doesn't exist, or that the world outside only exists by the signifiers the characters bring in, which is to say, yes, you'll have a working class person, but outside of your own relationship to the working class, you've no picture of what it means to be a working class person.
Yeah.
Here we get a pretty clear image of what Marta's life is, why it matters to her that the events go off, in a way that keeps her family safe. And in fact, we primarily get her perspective outside of the realm of the house, right? Everyone else exists in that house or when they show up in Marta's life. But Rian Johnson's not spending time, looking at what Jamie Lee Curtis's life looks like outside of that house or the relationships of the people there. And I think that's important given the degree to which this is a film about race, that like the race and poverty is like, or class. This is, I don't want to say poverty necessarily because it's not like Marta. Marta is definitely living a better life and her family are more stable than many folks. But it is specifically because she happened to stumble into a relationship with someone with someone incredibly rich. Right? Like, it is not because the system works.
I think there's an element, it's also about service, I think is maybe the more pointed way I would put that. It is about people who perform vital and necessary functions, often on behalf of people who are socioeconomically what we consider like better off. Marta is a not quite live-in nurse, but she is staying a great deal at that mansion to take care of this elderly writer, in part because
from morning to night, from his like all the time that he's awake in a day, right? Like,
yeah, and she's also his main source of society,
right?
Like that's the other thing. She says this early on. He needed a nurse, but what he really needed was a friend, and that is the thing that Marta realizes is part of her job and is part of the service she provides, but it's not the one she's allowed to charge for.
Right.
And I think this movie is very smart about what it understands about service work, about the skill it requires, about the empathy it requires, and it is. I think that like. I think there's definitely class critique in this too, but I think it is a movie deeply interested in the often unconsidered relationships between people who work in service and the people who make use of those services.
Right. It's actually literally about actual emotional labor and not the sort of catch-all term that we sometimes throw around when we mean our friend is sad. It means literally an aspect of her job here is to perform that emotional work, because and specifically because no one else in his life will, right? Because the other relationships he has have all atrophied. Just to like finish the summary so that people know what we're talking about if they haven't seen the film, but again want to hear us talk about it. The arc of this film, the three steps, the three acts, the kind of two reveals and three sections. One is you get to the house, who done it. Lakeith Stanfield is there along with another detective or another regular police detective.
Yeah.
And then in comes the Daniel Craig character, Benoit Blanc, with the greatest accent I've ever heard a person do, as a private detective who's been hired by someone mysterious to investigate the death of Harlan. And then about, I'd say, 45 minutes in, you get the flashback reveal. As Detective Blanc is interviewing everyone, you get the reveal that, in fact, Marta misdosed him with some medicine, or not some with morphine, right?
Right.
She had a thing of Toradol and a thing of morphine. She swapped them and juiced him with 100 milligrams of morphine,
and couldn't find the antidote effectively to clear his system out. And then in his final moments, he goes, "Listen, you cannot take the fall for this. Whatever you do, you have to listen to me carefully, climb out the back secret window and and then
because there's no saving him.
Right. There's no right. The whole thing is like
they do the math. An ambulance is not going to get here.
Exactly. We live out in the middle of the boonies. It's going to take forever for the ambulance to get here. We don't have the cure on hand, which she's supposed to have but doesn't. And time to go. And so suddenly the film flips itself and says, oh, there is no mystery here. You know the thing. And the film turns into a sort of crisis management story in which Marta is trying to stay a step ahead of the family and a step ahead of Daniel Craig, who is trying to figure out if there is some wrongdoing here.
It's especially difficult for her, given that she has this one quirk where she cannot lie without puking almost immediately. I've never seen someone hold a puking above the mantelpiece to be pulled down for Act 3, but boy, does that get done. If you put someone who pukes when they lie above a mantle in Act 1, you have to pull them down and let them puke on someone by the end of the movie.
Also, you can pointedly put a knife above the mantelpiece.
Oh my god,
that might not be real.
Yeah,
which is one of the greatest things.
It's so good. That was one of the ones I saw coming really far, but was very happy. But still, I don't care. That's not the point. As the review just read kind of suggests, like having that piece of the puzzle wasn't enough to make the puzzle. All it did was make me go, ha! Alone in a theater where no one had laughed yet. When it gets deployed, because it's like seeing a trick play. Do you know what I mean? It's like seeing the quarterback. Oh shit! The quarterback still has the ball. Ha! Amazing, great. And that is a great deal of craftsmanship. And the third act, after this, the second turn. I guess again, there's another turn after this in a sense, but at some point, Marta brings Chris Evans's character Ransom into great name into the conspiracy, so to speak. Reveals to Ransom, hey, I guess I skipped something big here, which is there's a will reading, as there always must be.
Yeah. And
the will reading reveals that Marta is going to inherit everything, the entire empire, the house itself, is going to become fabulously wealthy, and the family instantly turns on her. They already don't like Ransom, the kind of black sheep of the family, and even the socially progressive girl who's out in college getting like a crit theory degree or something. I forget what the degree was, but she's like a young lefty. She probably listens to this podcast. Reveals herself to side with the family instead of siding with Marta, despite all of her high-minded ideals and progressivism. Revealing that, like, down to I'm skipping over a lot of stuff here. There's lots of flashbacks of the family just being super fucking racist.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like she's one of the good ones stuff. There's that great shot of someone handing her a plate as if she's a server, as if she's like
Don Johnson's character.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don Johnson probably turning in one of his best dirtbag performances since Tin Cup ages ago. Like Don Johnson has nailed a certain type of country club shitbag. And
incredible.
it is on full glorious display here. Also, Toni Collette's Joni Thromby. As she is the member of the family trying to start an Instagram lifestyle cosmetics brand.
Yeah, she's trying to start Goop, basically.
It is a tremendous performance. Again, like the Rian Johnson commentary is worth it. Apparently, she showed up with the character basically like fleshed out.
Oh, incredible.
Like
Wow.
the character existed on the page, but she showed up with like, oh no, this is who Joni is. And it was basically so perfect. They're like, yep, just do that.
Do that.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then, so at that point, there's a moment where, because they are both ostracized, Ransom and Marta end up kind of teaming up. And I guess it's at this point that someone also begins to try to blackmail Marta. Like,
Yes.
like with
Yes.
Marta goes back home, and is it the Don Johnson character who shows up at her doorstep?
No.
Who is
it's,
It's the
Michael Shannon.
A Michael Shannon character as
Yes.
well. Yeah, who shows up. I would just really quick. There's a bunch of family members and extended family members, partners, husbands and wives. All of them have some business interest wrapped up in this.
Yeah.
There are a couple kids. Again, one of them is in kind of a liberal arts school. One of them is an alt-right internet Nazi shitbag.
and all of them are somehow
Little
in
Nazi
some
child.
way dependent on the fortune of
Yes.
the
Parlin. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them runs the publishing company. One of them
but
is
that publishing company only
only
publishes
publishes Harlan
his
stuff.
books.
Yeah. One of them, is getting money for her daughter and for herself for her daughter to go to school, and also pocketing the
dips,
rest.
yeah.
Double dips. Everyone is involved in some way, which is to say, everyone has some sort of motive and has had some deal of the relationship falling apart with the patriarch of the family. And so then it becomes Marta and Chris Evans being like, we got to figure out who this blackmailer is. We got to get you out of here. We got to figure out a way to make sure this all settles itself. And then the final turn being that Chris Evans was the like manipulator from
From the beginning.
the beginning, switches.
This part's hard to explain.
It is.
Because there's so many. Like basically, he
It is.
tried to set up a situation where Marta would do
kill
exactly
him.
what she believes she did.
Yes, but in
Where
fact,
he
didn't.
And I love this. The detail, the thing that exonerates her is it hinges on she's good at her job.
Right.
yeah.
Like there's you don't do a service job day in, day out without like developing a almost subconscious feel for what is right and like how things are supposed to be. And so even though the Chris Evans character swapped the medication labels so that she would give him way too much morphine rather than the Toradol, when she thinks she got confused, it's because she correctly identified, no, like morphine looks like this in a bottle. It has this sort of viscosity.
Right.
Like it has this consistency. So
Even
she
the
administers
weight, right?
the correct
It's even
dose.
like the weight
Yeah.
of the...
Yeah.
In the test that he does, that what's his face? I forget his name now. The Daniel Craig's character. He is talking and like slowly covering, like nonchalantly almost, the labels
Right,
of
right,
both
right.
of the bottles, and he puts them both down. And she goes up, picks one up, shakes it a bit, puts it down, picks up the other one, and shakes it, and says, "This is the morphine or whatever," which is just like, once you've like had to dig into a bag so many times in your life to do this job,
Yes,
you just
right.
get that feel, right?
We should know that there was it's a violent suicide that follows the morphine dose,
Right.
which is why people still believed it was a suicide, and also why he's still dead. She didn't give him the wrong drug, and then she didn't give him the right drug.
He's like, I need to die from something
Yes.
that's not a morphine overdose.
yes, exactly. Anyway, yeah, so that's the movie. That's the gist of it.
Right.
And yeah, so I think
There was the other death.
was there another death?
Yes.
Who's the other death?
The
housekeeper.
The housekeeper.
Oh, did she die?
Doesn't
Yeah,
she?
dude.
Fran
That's what the whole
dies?
that's what the whole third act hinges on.
Right. In the empty laundromat or whatever, where she's supposed to go meet the blackmailer. Right. Yes.
So, my position, like, I think this is in a lot of ways, it's a really satisfying mystery because it changes what it's doing on you a couple times. It starts out as a traditional whodunit, which of this cast of characters is guilty, and then it turns into, and Rian Johnson talks about this very consciously, what if it's a Columbo movie, but genuinely the person who committed the crime is innocent, genuinely, like, they deserve to get away with this. And so, like, you're kind of on some level identifying with them, because in some ways every Columbo story is a horror story, right? You committed the perfect crime, and then this shabby fucking dude shows up and just steadily starts pulling your perfect crime apart at the seams. What if it's that, but the murderer is sympathetic? And then this third act is, no, this was a whodunit. This was the perfect crime. How was it committed? I think the movie really works on that level, but what I think makes it more interesting to me and makes me really enjoy it a lot more than a lot of similar mysteries is the fact that I think what this is ultimately trying to be about is this notion of what people of a certain class, of a certain background, feel is owed to them.
Yeah.
And the limits of their sympathy and empathy when that is threatened.
Totally. Cado, I'm curious for you on this, because when we first brought this up, you were like, we have to talk about this, especially because of how the film deals with race. And as we said, Marta is a Latina woman.
From what country?
Don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We never get a single.
In fact, right. One of the running gags.
Yeah, is that each time one of the family members brings up where she's from, it's a different South American country.
Yeah. Which is to say. Yeah. Again.
Yeah, that is how invested those people are in this person, who they repeatedly say, like, "Oh, we'll take care of you. Like, don't worry, we've got your back." But when the tables are turned, like, they realize that connection is not really there, because she is not going to have their back ever.
Well, she's not going to have their back ever explicitly because the treatment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's totally justified.
I mean, actually, she totally would have had their backs.
Maybe. She seems like a nice enough person.
Right, where she would be like, yeah, of course you can have the publishing. You can keep working at the publishing company. Of course your daughter can keep going to school. Like, I'm not going to bankrupt this family overnight.
Yeah.
But
as they, like, slowly reveal, like, deeper and deeper, like, how far... It's kind of how far people will go in general to survive, and with the different reasons that they need to. Like, Marta needs it to survive because that is her actual livelihood, that, given different socioeconomic reasons, like, that is the job she's ended up in. And, like, it's a job that ends up in the hands of immigrants a lot, actually, as well. So, but the family needs this inheritance because they've all, instead of, and this is, like, a thing that comes up again and again, like, this idea of, like, instead of making something, everyone, they're all, like, it lays bare privilege, right? Like, it makes it really, like, by the way, if you don't know how privilege works, this is sometimes literally how it works, but here's kind of a metaphor for privilege. Is like, they all need the money from their father in order to continue these businesses that supposedly they're running.
These
but
mediocre
really,
lives, basically, right? Like,
yeah,
they are not striving. They are not successful folks
they
outside
think
of.
they are, and it's made clear that they actually aren't, because he can and has started even before the suicide happens to, like, cut them off, or threaten that he's cutting them off, which becomes later the motivation for Ransom's character to plot this whole thing, is that he's the one that knows that everyone's getting cut off. It's about, well, yeah, like Rob was saying earlier, they deserve this. This is their right. There's a joke made about the home and it being their family's ancestral home, and I forget the exact quote, but it's like brought up that actually
Benoit says they bought it from a Pakistani real estate lawyer in the 80s. But I think I think one of the other things that is happening with this family is Harlan himself bears some responsibility for this. Like, I think one of the other things that's running through this is the way that wealth and privilege like kind of twists people, right? Like, Harlan has absolutely used his position he's cutting this whole family off, but this is after years of letting their dependence on him build, right? Like, there's a great scene between him and Michael Shannon as he tells Walt that Walt is not going to be the head of the publishing empire anymore. And you see Michael Shannon, this just hitting like a kicked dog in some ways, because Walt might be shitty. He might be greedy. He might be selfish. He's also someone who really liked working with his dad. Yeah. And really just wanted to make his dad happy and proud in some ways and show that he could do something too. It's a much more sympathetic, like Fredo type figure in some ways. And the scene unfolds, and like, it's a brutal thing Harlan does the night before he dies, right? Like, he brings the hammer down on all these people. They deserve it to varying degrees. And as the movie unfolds, they certainly reveal their true colors. I think one of the things that really brings out the Get Out association for me is almost all of these characters, when they see Marta, says the same thing. I thought you should have been at the funeral, but I was outvoted. And it's in the structure and the framing, it calls to mind Get Out's I'd have voted for Obama a third time if I could have. Yeah. It's always this sort of allusion to, I would have done something, but it's just like that sometimes. And obviously it wasn't me, but other people chose to go a different direction. Yeah. And everyone says that, and you realize someone is lying because they all think she should have been there, and yet she wasn't invited to the funeral. And so I think there's two themes here of, like, in some ways this family is deeply prejudiced and blind to Marta's humanity. They're also very much a group of people who have been shaped and warped by the privilege that has been granted to them.
Well, and also it's worth noting here too that, like, one of the most interesting things about the setup is that the different members of the family will all be able to sustain their lives after this to differing degrees, right? Like, Jamie Lee Curtis's character, Linda, is a real estate mogul, is rich on her own, runs a business that is successful. Yeah.
She got millions of dollars in seed money.
Right. From Harlan. Of course. Yeah. But she will sustain herself. She will power through this in a way, or would have. And so going into that, going into the turn where Marta ends up being the one who gets the inheritance, you go, maybe you suspect, the family is going to be cut in different ways here. You have the people who will be able to live through it, and they like Marta, and they seem like they're progressive, and maybe they'll side with her. No. They all turn into inwards. Suddenly all of the issues among them. Suddenly the fact that there is the Nazi grandchild on one corner and the progressive Tumblr using granddaughter on the other. No, it doesn't matter. It's all of us together as this big, strong, rich white family. We have to have what is ours. And then the second part of it, to go back to what you were just saying also, the sort of like, if I could have done it, I would have done more. Even Harlan is guilty of this. He could have given Marta money when he was alive. Instead, he worked her into the will. Right. He had no plans of dying. Like, there was no secret, like, and then I'm going to kill myself after I
get this money now.
So I get this money. No, he could have just done that. Right. He could have absolutely. And the film could have spent the time. If that wasn't, like, I can imagine someone going, well, maybe he was going to do that. And the film would have told us if that was his plan. I promise you that would have been raised. And instead we have even him having this failure, right? Which is he is only thinking about these things in abstract terms in the sense that a will can be a very material thing, but also very abstract. Like when I'm done, the people I care about will be taken care of.
I have no need of this anymore.
Yes, exactly. Unlike now, when I need this big empty mansion to myself, this big empty mansion that is part of why I need socialization so much, because I'm alone in this giant fucking terrible place.
Yeah.
With the throne made out of knives.
God.
Incredible.
Can I just shout out here, Lakeith Stanfield's detective?
Oh, he's so good.
Lieutenant Elliot.
I hope he's in all of the sequels alongside
Yeah.
Blank Me like so badly.
Because I think the thing that I think can be really valuable in a piece like this is you need someone who feels like they come from a slightly different world.
Yeah.
And we have like his deputy, the Trooper Wagner character, Noah Sagan. He's the goofball, incompetent detective, kind of the putz. But Lakeith Stanfield feels like a police procedural detective who stumbled into a locked room whodunit. You know what I mean? He has this sort of jaundiced, jaded, exhausted vibe with the entire thing where he doesn't this doesn't even look like a crime. He doesn't fully know why he's here.
Yeah.
And he has this sort of like, he's not lazy, he's not incompetent, but he's a busy guy with an important job, and he is bored and frustrated with this entire thing.
Yeah.
And I love the scene where he finally, like the end of this sort of first act setup, where he finally confronts Daniel Craig's character, and he's like, Benny, I've come with you this far. I need to know what the fuck is going on. And I like that, because a lot of this movie has a sort of heightened tone. I like that Stanfield's Lieutenant Elliot feels like he is downplaying it, because like, look, this is one murder, this is one thing that exists in his world this week, and he's not here for all this nonsense.
Totally. He reminds me so much, or he feels like he's cut from the same cloth as another black detective who is the associate of the great super genius detective, which is Marcus Bell in Elementary, the kind of New York PD, like not second in command, but like the second. He's like a tertiary character. He's a supporting character along with like Gregson, and obviously with Lucy Liu's take on Watson. One of my all-time favorite things in a detective story is the sequence that happens, I want to say in season 2 of Elementary, where Sherlock, who is played really well by what is his name? Why am I blanking? Johnny Lee Miller. Says to Marcus, Marcus, kind of breaks down what's happening in a scene of the crime, and Sherlock goes like, "Have you always been this observant?" And Marcus looks at him like, "Are you fucking kidding me right now?" And he says, "I'm asking that quite sincerely. I was wondering if your exposure to my methods has helped you in any way." And Marcus goes, "Actually, before you came along, I'd never closed a case before. Neither had the rest of the department. Most of us were thinking of packing up and leaving, letting the city fend for itself." Like, yeah, motherfucker, we close cases. We're real
great
people.
moment, by the way.
Yeah.
Best Marcus Bell moment for me is there's a point where Holmes does his local New York historian bit.
Oh yes,
where he launches into there was a 19th century insane asylum nearby, and there's a strange legacy of, and Marcus completes the story and looks at him and just like, yeah, I Googled it on the way over too.
Yeah, 100%, 100%, right? And I think that you're right that Stanfield here brings the audience in that way, because Blanc certainly couldn't, right? In fact, Blanc feels like he has to be part of the mystery in some way, to the degree that he has to be a person who you suspect also. Stanfield is the only person here who you don't suspect, and appropriately, he is the only other character of color, right?
Yeah.
There is an intrinsic, and he's a cop. But in this one case, when it's Keith Stanfield, I'll allow it. But there is an alliance here between he and Marta in some ways, down to the fact that like they got all the times that he's like, just let her go in another room. Can we just bring her out of the fucking picture? And Benoit Blanc, because he's a genius super detective, was like, I think she is the key to this case. And like, all right, fine. And she ends up being the key to the case. But that there is a certain not just an affability, but a kind of allegiance of like rich white people.
Yeah.
I know you've been through it.
Yeah.
I don't want to bother you. I know this is weird. I know you're in a situation where you are the person who, despite not being the person who's lost their father, is long-term being thrown into instability here. I do not want to have to call you in for another testimony. We've already gotten your testimony. And I like that bit of the story quite a bit. I like this movie a lot. I really do. And for me, like one of the biggest things here is, boy, I like Rian Johnson as a filmmaker. Like, there's a point at which I have to stop counting flukes. You know what I mean? Like, I like Looper more than I thought I did. I like having seen Rise of Skywalker. I like Last Jedi more than I thought I did. I like Knives Out quite a bit. I have to go back and watch Brick and Brothers Bloom to see if that's how I feel about those years removed. Yeah, but like, right, I'm excited.
Here's my counter argument.
Yes,
it's not even a counter argument necessarily. I think Johnson is really great. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of what makes Johnson effective, though, is he brings back a type of hit that Hollywood and movies used to be pretty good at producing and have just largely disappeared, right? Like, Knives Out is an impeccably made film. It is a really well-crafted, well-written mystery. There's a care and concern for how
visual storytelling, all the stuff that we haven't talked about is also fantastic. God. Sorry, I remember the best line in this movie. I have to shout it out before I forget it, which is, I think I read that in a tweet about a New Yorker piece. That's it. Done. Okay.
Yes.
God. Anyway, I think I read about you in a tweet about a New Yorker piece. Anyway.
His longtime collaborator, Steve Yedlin, the cinematographer, does an incredible job with this film. There's, again, on Johnson's commentary, apparently,
can you set up
Yedlin
the commentary, actually? Because I think that's a really funny and interesting feature thing that he does that I don't think people know about, because this movie's not on DVD.
Yeah, he releases podcast commentary for his movies while the movie's in the theater.
What?
So you can download Rian Johnson's commentary and bring it in with you on your phone. And then it gives you the title card where the commentary syncs up. So when you're in the theater, you see like the Lionsgate logo appear. You hit play on that file, and you can be sitting there in the theater listening to the commentary track.
That's fucking amazing.
Which I did last night with the screener that I've got, which was really nice. But he sets up that Steve Yedlin like has a lot of techniques and even like post-process solutions for making digital look like film. And so one of the reasons this film looks so classic in some ways is because like Yedlin's in there constantly messing around with it to give it the characteristics that we associate with like film photography, even though it's entirely shot on digital. But the other point I'm getting to here, though, is Rian Johnson is a scholar of movies like this. He's a scholar of this type of cinema, and he is turning in like virtuoso productions of these types and reinterpretations of these types of genre works. But I do sometimes wonder if it would feel as remarkable or as fresh to us if so many types of these movies hadn't basically been driven out of the box office in the last like 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. The whodunit murder mystery, or just the murder mystery movie used to not be a rare thing. It is now.
Right.
Yeah, so I've like spent the last year. I didn't really talk about this, but I've watched a bunch of this style of murder mystery in the last year, and they're all things that are on like BritBox TV and other similar streaming services that are, obviously maybe originally aired on BBC or other British television channels. And these are the things like the Poirot mysteries and Mrs. Marple and things like that are the Christie style whodunit. And some of which have had, stronger adaptations than just the kind of television movie style or the television weekly series or serial. But that is where the visual mystery has like maybe gone to, is just TV. And I don't know that's such a bad place for it. You bring up someone like Columbo, right? Like there is a history of, I talk about Elementary. The televised serial is a kind of a good place for this style of whodunit because this is not the sort of statement I make a lot because I don't believe it, but it feels like it might be the best format for that style of story, the most honest format for that style or platform for that style of story, which is, here's a digestible thing. Here's a thing that you can eat and watch and consume and move off of, and then move on with your life. You may find that in something like an episode of Marple, there is some gesture at talking about queerness, or about imperialism, or about class, but you're not going to find anything revolutionary there. And I kind of wonder if the filmic model would almost overpromise, or not overpromise, but it competes with my time spent in a theater where I actually want to be challenged and not just entertained.
I mean, in some ways, I feel like Rian Johnson's kind of pushing back against, or like is kind of aware of this in the way that he structured this movie, right? Like it's like three episodes, like one mini arc of a mystery. Like you can kind of almost see exactly where the episode would end.
Yeah, they're like 42-minute episodes or whatever.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Totally. And I think you're right. Also, that it pushes back in that other way, which is like by revealing at the end of the first act by saying, "Hey, let me show you the murder. Right. Let me show it to you." It pulls away from that style of whodunit, but does still remain almost episodic in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this has been one of the delights of the end of 2019, the start of 2020. I think now I've seen this movie. I saw it twice in theaters.
Oh, wow. And then once at home. Wow.
Yeah, because it was sort of a perfect... Like, I grew up on stuff like this. I don't think my parents have seen a new movie in this genre, like, in ages, right? So it's like, we have to go see this. Like, this is so your shit. And I'm not sure they're familiar with Rian Johnson, right? So we went out and saw it, and they enjoyed it a lot. And then watching it with the commentary the other night was really terrific. But I think to an extent, what I really appreciate about this movie is that there is such a pull toward an ostentatious, old-fashioned quality when you're telling a story like this, right? There could be a very easy pull to a nostalgia, they don't make them like this anymore type of movie where you basically try to recreate an old Mrs. Marple story or something like that. I think it becomes a really vital movie, not just in the sense that it's crucial, but also in the sense that it is a living work in dialogue with its moment, because it is taking these classic structures and then, rather than setting them in a 1930s English manor house, it shows us present day America in it. And I think that is a brilliant decision.
Totally. I am curious what happens next. I think they've come out and said there will be another Benoit Blanc movie.
Huh.
A thing I love about this movie is that it is Marta's film. Benoit Blanc is there and is important, is a secondary lead. They're both leads. I don't want to jump ahead 10 years and have had 10 years of Benoit Blanc helps the minorities. I think that's a risk. And I think there's a way, it's a story that ends up, is there a model in which each time he kind of like flutters into someone's life and then that person is the person who helps solve the mystery of their own life and blah, blah, blah. Like maybe, but at a certain point structurally, if he ends up being the sort of like axle on which justice turns, you end up saying something different than what you set out to say.
Right.
But I'm curious to see where it goes from here. And I think there are obviously ways to remedy that. I think strong casting and interesting storytelling and eventually telling his story and letting that stand on its own could be interesting. So we'll see. Sure. I don't know where the fuck that accent comes from. Nowhere.
Who the fuck knows?
I want to find out.
Looney Tunes.
Looney
Tunes.
From literally Looney Tunes. From Froghorn Leghorn.
Yeah.
Foghorn. There are so many different flavors of Southern accent, though. If you told me, like, oh no, this is like people from this one like 50-mile wide corridor of Louisiana Bayou tend to sound like that, I'd be like, sure, yeah, I buy that.
Yeah, totally, sure.
But I did get flashbacks to Tim Curry doing Gabriel Knight, Gabriel Knight 1. So
yes.
That name is French, right?
Yeah, that could be Louisiana.
I can't.
Yeah, Louisiana.
Is that what that accent? Is that accent even from?
Yeah.
I straight up read it like Tennessee.
I could see it be Tennessee. I could see it
Right?
be
That's why I was
fake.
like,
I could see it being fake.
It's probably
I think
fake.
he's fake. I think he's
I really
British.
hope that's a thing.
Yeah.
It
He's
ends
hiding
up being
from the
fake.
mob. He's hiding from the queen. I don't care. Who's he hiding from? Blanc. Oh, Blanc? Really?
Uh-huh.
Blank? Huh?
White.
White.
Yeah.
White. Right? Am I right? God.
Perfect. All right. I think that will do it for our discussion of Knives Out. I think it's still in some theaters right now, but I think it is starting to wind down its theatrical run, and will probably be hitting DVD and streaming imminently.
Do you know Benoit comes from the French Benoist, which comes from the Latin word benedictus, which means the one who says the good? He's the white guy who says good things. Finally, there's one.
Fuck.
That's all.
God damn it.
All right.
You cracked the code, Austin.
Yeah, you should come see.
You truly followed gravity's rainbow.
to its conclusion. Yeah. This is I'm going to get justice for me. My justice.
All right. Our thanks to Too Mellow for the track Slide Asleep off the album After Midnight. You can find that at twomellowmakes.bandcamp.com. You can keep up with all of us at waypoint.vice.com. I'm Rob Zachney. You can find me on Twitter at Rob Zachney. Austin, where can people find you?
At Austin_Walker.
Cado.
At A_Cado_appear.
Cado.
Cado. I get a lot of T's for some reason.
You get a lot of Cado. Different person. Cato.
I am convinced somebody was like, I always look for Cado, and I can never find that guy's Twitter.
Yeah.
I am convinced that was deep levels of irony about the fact that we joke that you yourself can't remember your Twitter handle.
Oh, could be.
That is my interpretation. That is my headcanon in this situation, and I love it. That will do it for this week's Waypoints. We hope you've enjoyed the break.
Having a name that's one letter too long. One letter too long. God damn it.
Sorry.
Please be sure to rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice, if it should allow such a thing. I think we're a 5-star podcast, but it's not for me to say. We'll be back again with Waypoint Radio on Monday.
Maybe we have to figure out what we're going to do. We have to figure
presumably.
Yeah,
it's late in the day. We'll see how all this unfolds.
We will see.
But until Monday, my house, my rules.
Do not let yourself. No, not. I've lost it. Do not give into astonishment.
Yeah, there's no way, like, the idea that, oh, yeah, there was an entire house here this entire time and nobody ever knew about it.
In the basement.
There's no good story there. I mean, there could be a good story, but you know what I mean? Like, there's no happy story.
No.
No, it's going to be terror. It's going to be...
The Bronte sisters present.
I know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The House Under the Stairs is not the movie I signed up to see on this bus. Weird. But also this makes sense as to when they said, like, oh, the new DLC is going to be about new characters forever ago, it was pretty clear that they were not just going to do, like, the next chapter of Three Houses.
Yeah.
When we do our Three Houses spoiler cast at some point, that'll be something we can talk about.
At the end of the month, probably.
That's probably right, right?
Perfect. Everyone at time.is?
Oh. You got it?
Yeah, I got it. Okay. Boom. Yes. I am now at time.is.
All right. Shall we go on 12?
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.